In the heart of Western Africa, nestled between a mountain range and a dense forest, lies the ancient village of Okoroba. The village, surrounded by sacred groves and misty rivers, had stood for centuries, untouched by the modern world, unyielding in its traditions. The people of Okoroba lived not just among themselves, but among the spirits of their ancestors. Every tree, every stone, every gust of wind was believed to carry whispers from the other side. The villagers were farmers, hunters, and spiritual custodians of their land. Their lives were guided by the unseen, by the ancestors who had passed, yet never truly left. In Okoroba, the line between the living and the dead was thin, sometimes crossed by dreams, omens, or the murmur of leaves during ritual nights. But in recent years, the village had changed. The young began leaving. The sacred forest was no longer approached with reverence, but cleared to make room for roads and trade. Traditional festivals were shortened, and sacrifices once made faithfully were forgotten. The village elders warned that neglecting the ancestors would lead to disaster, but their words were treated like faded chants from a forgotten era. Then came the drought. Rain had not fallen for 7 moons. The fields of maize and yam lay cracked and empty. Rivers turned to muddy trails. Cattle died. Children grew thinner. Every morning, villagers looked to the sky with hope, and every night, they prayed. But the heavens remained dry. The ancestors, it seemed, were silent. Until one evening, when the sky turned a strange shade of red, and the wind whispered a name no one had spoken in decades. And then, it began. The wind howled with fury. The trees swayed like dancers possessed. Thunder cracked like ancestral drums. And within the heart of the storm, something ancient stirred. The people of Okoroba would soon realize that the rain was not just a blessing, nor the wind just a force of nature. It was a message, a cry, a command, a sign from the ancestors that could no longer be ignored. The sun hung low over Okoroba, bloated and cruel, casting its orange glare upon a village weary with thirst. The air shimmered above the dusty paths like restless spirits trying to rise but trapped by heat. Chickens moved sluggishly through the yard, their feathers dulled by the ever-present dust. Even the dogs, once fierce guards of the compounds, lay stretched out in the shade, tongues lolling in exhaustion. The drought had come without warning. It had been 7 moons since the last real rain. At first, it had seemed like a temporary shift in season, just a longer dry spell than usual. The elders offered prayers to the river goddess Nkem, poured libations at the shrine of the ancestors, and assured everyone that the rain would come soon. But each passing week brought a deeper silence in the sky. Clouds gathered now and then, teasing the villagers with hope, only to be torn apart by the harsh northern winds. Fields once green and thick with yam vines now lay bare and broken. Cracks ran through the soil like open wounds. The millet and maize shriveled before reaching harvest. And the okra died without flowering. Women trudged longer distances each day to fetch water, returning with smaller gourds half filled from shrinking wells. Children who once splashed and shouted along the banks of the great river Oran, now played in dust bowls, their laughter growing thin. In the center of the village, under the shade of the sacred Irako tree, sat Elder Tund, his eyes sunken but watchful. His white beard flowed like the last trickle of an ancient stream. And his staff, carved with the faces of 4 ancestors, rested on his lap. People still came to him, bowing low, seeking answers in hushed tones. "What have we done, Baba?" a mother asked one day, cradling her limp baby who hadn't eaten in 2 days. "Why has the sky forgotten us?" Elder Tun sighed. "It is not the sky that forgets. It is the children of the earth who forget their roots." He raised his eyes to the horizon where the sun blazed mercilessly. "We have neglected the ancestors. Their shrines are overgrown. Their names are no longer spoken in the morning air. The spirits do not abandon us. We push them away. But not everyone listened. The younger men, hardened by the failing crops and hungry children, muttered among themselves. "What use are rituals when there is no food?" said Abika, a strong farmer in his 30s. "We need more land, more trade, not more chance and blood on the altar." Others nodded. The old ways, they felt, were holding the village back. They no longer feared the spirits that once governed their fathers' lives. They sought modern answers, digging deeper wells, burning more land for planting. But the more they struggled, the more the land resisted. Meanwhile, deep within the forest grove, now partially cleared and desecrated by illegal loggers, the ancestral shrine stood silent and wounded. Vines crept over its crumbling stones. Offerings had not been made in months. The once vibrant shrine where generations had danced, sung, and called to the spirits now echoed with neglect. Only one soul still tended to it. Amarachi, a young woman of 22, daughter of the late priestess Nkiru, came every seventh day to sweep the shrine and whisper prayers to the wind. She brought water from the dwindling Oran River and bathed the altar stone with reverent hands. She brought kola nuts, goat's milk, and the occasional snail or hen, whatever she could find. She did not speak much, but her presence in the sacred grove was constant. Many called her the girl who talks to ghosts. Others laughed at her devotion. But she did not mind. She had seen too much to doubt. Her mother had told her, just before passing, that Okoroba was protected by a covenant, an ancient pact sealed generations ago between the founding ancestor Oba and Duka and the spirits of the land. As long as the people honored the old ways, the land would feed them, the river would sing, and the rain would dance over their fields. But if the pact was broken, the spirits would speak in signs, subtle at first, then wild and furious. And now, the spirits were stirring. On the night of the 7th moon, as the village lay in restless sleep, Amarachi had a dream. She stood in a field of dust. The sun was black. The trees were leafless skeletons. From the ground, hands reached up, ancient, calloused, crying in silence. Then, a roar of wind. A twisting howl that tore through the air like the cry of a grieving mother. Rain began to fall, but not like she had ever seen. It came sideways, in silver needles, and with it, voices. Names. Names of the forgotten dead. She awoke gasping, her skin damp despite the heat. Outside, not a single leaf stirred. But she knew. The ancestors were no longer whispering. They were shouting. At dawn, she ran to the shrine, her heart pounding like ritual drums. She knelt and wept, calling upon the spirit of her mother, of Oba and Duka, of the river goddess Nkem. If we have sinned, show us the path back, she cried. If we have forgotten, teach us to remember. If we have closed our ears, speak through wind, through rain, whatever it takes. We are still your children. That day, the sky turned gray for the first time in months. By evening, the wind began to blow, not hot and dry as before, but cold, heavy, and filled with electricity. The villagers looked up, murmuring. Dogs barked. Birds flew low. Elder Tun stood under the irako tree, gripping his staff tightly. The ancestors are speaking, he whispered. And we must listen, or suffer. But not all were ready to hear. Some laughed, others cursed the change in weather, seeing it as another tease from the cruel skies. No one noticed the cracks forming on the shrine stone deep in the grove. No one, except Amarachi. And that night, when the storm finally came, it would not bring peace. It would bring revelation. The night air was heavy with expectation. A strange silence hovered over Okoroba, as if the entire village held its breath. Crickets that once chirped endlessly now kept mute. The goats bleated softly, uneasily, as if sensing something that the humans could not see. Smoke curled from cooking fires, and families huddled around dim lanterns, eating what little food remained. They spoke in hushed voices, not out of reverence, but dread. Even the stubborn wind that had long tormented the village with dry gusts had stopped, as if retreating before something greater. In the darkness, a low moaning began, not human, not animal, but elemental. The trees swayed though the air was still. Dry leaves rustled across the ground in spirals, dancing to a rhythm unheard by the living. Elder Tund emerged from his hut without speaking a word. He walked slowly to the center of the village, where the sacred Irako tree stood, towering above all else. He placed his hand on the bark and whispered something only the spirits could hear. Then the wind returned. But it was not the same wind. It came not from the north, nor the east, but from all directions at once. It whirled through the village, lifting skirts, tossing firewood, rattling windows and doors. It carried with it the scent of the river and the forest, the stench of decay and the sweetness of old rituals, like a memory suddenly exhumed from the past. Amarachi stood barefoot in the grove, her wrapper flapping wildly against her legs. Her hair whipped around her face as she knelt before the ancestral altar. She had brought no offering this time, only her voice. "Speak," she cried into the wind. "We are listening. I am listening. Tell us what we must do." The wind howled louder, and then, for a moment, it stopped. Dead silence. And then the rain began. Not in drops, not in a gentle rhythm, but in an explosion, an avalanche from the heavens. Sheets of water fell like a curtain pulled over the sky. The villagers screamed and ran for shelter, startled by the violence of it. For many children, it was the first real rain they had ever seen. But this was no ordinary rain. It pounded the earth as if trying to wake it. It washed through the cracks in the soil, down the paths, into every hut, every shrine. Thunder rolled overhead, not in singular strikes, but like drums from 1,000 ancestors pounding in the clouds. Lightning cracked and danced like ancestral spirits weaving through the air. And then came the voices. Soft at first, whispering on the wind. Names, phrases, broken memories. Enduka. Ani, protect. Return what was taken. In Elder Tun's hut, the old man knelt with his head to the ground. Tears streamed down his face, not of fear, but awe. "They have come back," he murmured. "After all these years, they have returned to remind us." In her dream the night before, Amarachi had heard these same voices. Now, standing drenched before the altar, she recognized the tones, her mother's gentle hum, her grandfather's stern chant, the wailing of long-forgotten women from generations ago. They were here. They were all here. Suddenly, the rain stopped as sharply as it had begun. The silence that followed was deafening. The clouds parted slightly, allowing a sliver of moonlight to touch the earth. The village, soaked and trembling, emerged slowly from shelter. Water dripped from rooftops. Chickens shook themselves. Babies wailed. Then came the scream. It pierced the night like a knife. Everyone turned toward the direction of the shrine grove. It was Amarachi. They ran, men and women, young and old, barefoot and stumbling through mud and darkness, following the sound. When they reached her, they found her collapsed before the altar stone, her hands covered in blood, eyes wide open in shock. The shrine stone had cracked completely in two. From within the split, something had emerged, a small, black wooden idol, shaped like a figure with a twisted face and arms crossed over its chest. It was not there before. No one had ever seen it. Yet it radiated an energy so powerful that many dared not approach. Elder Tund arrived, breathing heavily. He knelt beside Amarachi and placed his hands gently on her forehead. "She is not harmed," he said after a moment. "She has received a message. A vision." "But what does it mean?" asked one of the younger men, fearfully eyeing the idol. "Is it a curse?" No, Tun said. It is a reminder. A warning. And a path. That night, the village sat together under the stars. No one returned to their homes. They built fires and listened as Tun spoke. Long ago, our ancestors made a pact with the spirits of this land. Oba and Duka sealed it with a gift, this idol. It was buried within the shrine, never to be seen unless the covenant was broken. He pointed to the idol, now resting on a clean white cloth. The rain was not just water. It was a cleansing. The wind was not just noise. It was their cry. They ask us to return. To remember. To rebuild what we have torn down. The villagers sat in stunned silence. Even the skeptics could no longer deny what they had witnessed. Amarachi, now awake and calm, spoke softly. They want us to perform the renewal ritual. Tund nodded. Yes. The Ozo of remembrance. It has not been performed in 40 years. But we have no priest, one woman said. Amarachi stood. Yes, we do. The people looked at her. The wind stirred again. And in that moment, even the most doubtful among them felt it, the eyes of the ancestors watching, waiting. The next morning, old men stood outside their huts with open palms turned to the sky, not in desperation but in gratitude. Women knelt near water pots, wiping them clean. Humming forgotten songs once used in ancestral ceremonies. But amid the quiet joy, something deeper stirred, an awareness that the rain was not merely a gift. It was a call. And one among them had answered. Amarachi sat beneath the great Irako tree, eyes closed, her hair still damp from the storm. All around her, the villagers gathered. Not as they once did to mock or dismiss her, but now in awe. Elder Tun stood beside her, staff in hand. His gaze not on her face but on the distant hills where the sun rose behind the ancestral grove. A decision had been made during the night. The villagers had agreed to restore the Ozo of remembrance. The sacred ritual meant to rebind the broken covenant between the living and the dead. But there was no priest. No one left who had been trained in the rites. The old priestess, Amarachi's mother, had died years before without passing her mantle. Now the spirits had chosen someone new. Amarachi's voice was soft, but steady as a river when she spoke. I am not my mother, she said. I have not worn the white robe. I have not walked the sacred hills. I have not been anointed. But I have heard them. They spoke in the rain. They showed me the idol. They cracked the stone beneath my hands. I do not claim to be ready. I only know that I must go where they lead. The people listened. No one objected. Tun placed his hand gently on her shoulder. You are the bridge now, child. The mouth through which they speak. You must be prepared. That day, Amarachi was led into the grove for 7 days of solitude. No one was to follow. It was said that when one accepted the call of the ancestors, they must pass through silence to hear the full voice of the spirits. The grove, though small and partially desecrated in recent years, still held power. The air within was heavy, not with heat, but with memory. Amarachi wore a simple white wrapper and brought nothing with her but water, a clay bowl, and a staff carved from Irako wood. The idol discovered in the shrine was placed before her on a mat woven from palm fronds. She knelt before it at dawn and dusk, closed her eyes, and listened, not with her ears, but with the part of her soul that reached into the unseen. On the third night, they came to her. Not in dreams, nor in vision, but in wind. It began with the rustle of the palm leaves overhead, though the air itself was still. Then the earth beneath her knees seemed to shift ever so slightly. Like something ancient and vast turning in its sleep. The air cooled, thick with the scent of camwood and kola. And then she heard the chant, low, wordless, yet filled with meaning. Voices rose like mist from the forest floor, circling her, echoing from tree to tree. They called her name, not once, but many times. Amarachi. 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 1,000 mouths. All with the same breath. And then, silence again. Her body trembled, but she did not run. She knew she was not alone. They were testing her resolve, measuring her spirit. She placed both hands on the idol, closed her eyes, and whispered the ancient invocation her mother had once taught her as a child. Let the veil lift. Let the breath pass. Let the dead speak through the living. I am yours, and you are mine. A sudden gust of wind swept through the grove, though no storm followed. The idol grew warm in her hands. Her vision blurred, not from tears, but from a brightness that poured not from the sky, but from inside her. When she awoke the next morning, she was no longer just Amarachi. She had crossed. On the 7th day, she emerged. Her white wrapper was stained with earth and ash, her feet calloused and bleeding. Her eyes, however, shone with a depth none had seen before. Children stepped back instinctively. Even the dogs bowed their heads. Tund waited for her, dressed in full regalia, the same ceremonial garment he had not worn in 40 years. He approached without a word, bowed low before her, and then handed her a calabash filled with river water. You are ready, he said. The ritual preparations began at once. For 3 days. The village cleaned every path, repaired every broken idol, cleared weeds from the ancestral groves. The blacksmith reopened his old forge to craft ceremonial blades and bells. Drummers rehearsed forgotten rhythms under the moonlight. Elder women began weaving garments from dyed raffia. And the hunters ventured deep into the forest to seek offerings worthy of the ancestors, a white goat, a golden fish, a rare bird with feathers like flame. In the center of it all stood Amarachi. Now draped in white and red, her forehead marked with chalk, a circle drawn over her heart. She spoke little, but when she did, people listened. Her voice no longer belonged only to her, it carried with it the weight of 100 generations. But not everyone rejoiced. In the outskirts of the village, Abika, the defiant young farmer who once rejected the old ways, watched with narrowed eyes. He did not believe in wind spirits or talking idols. He believed in seeds and soil, tools and trade. Yet even he could not deny the storm, or the idol, or the strange stillness that now wrapped itself around Amarachi like a cloak of mist. Still, something in him resisted. He walked alone to the edge of the forest one night, calling into the darkness. If you truly exist, he whispered bitterly, then speak to me, too. The wind answered. Not in words, but in coldness. Abika felt it, a chill running up his spine, like fingers pressed to the nape of his neck. The leaves rustled without breeze. The shadows moved though no light flickered. And he ran. Back in the village, Amarachi sat in her hut, the idol before her. She did not smile. She did not weep. She merely listened. The wind was beginning to speak again. The rain had returned. But the true message of the ancestors had not yet been fully revealed. And soon, all of Okoroba, believers and doubters alike, would learn what the storm had truly come to cleanse. The drums began before dawn. Their slow, echoing thump rippled across the valley, carried by the returning wind. Okoroba, once choked in drought, now glistened under morning mist. Dew formed on yam leaves that hadn't grown in months. The river Oran ran deeper, clearer, as if washing away years of spiritual neglect. But this peace was deceptive. For something deeper stirred beneath the rhythm of the drums, an undercurrent of reckoning. The day of the Ozo of remembrance had come. Men walked bare-chested. Their faces painted with ash and ochre, carrying staffs and calabashes. Women wore wrappers dyed with sacred symbols and crowns of woven grass and beads. Children were kept indoors. Their eyes shielded, for this ritual was not meant for the uninitiated. The entire village had become a temple. Every tree a witness. Every breeze a messenger. And at the center of it all stood Amarachi. She was robed entirely in white, but not the pristine white of new cloth. This was white soaked in river water and fire ash, marked by ritual. Her face was painted with 3 vertical lines, one for the past, one for the present, and one for the ancestors. Around her neck hung the small black idol, now bound with red string and cowries. Its eyes seemed to gleam faintly, watching. A circle of firewood had been laid in the center of the village square, forming a sacred boundary no one could cross without permission. Within the circle stood Amarachi, elder Tund, and the idol, now placed upon a raised platform of stone and straw. Around the outer rim of the firewood ring stood the 12 eldest men and women of Okoroba, the circle of memory, as they were known, witnesses to the old rites that had long gone silent. The air was dense. Amarachi raised both hands, and the drums stopped. "In this place," she said, her voice clear as the river after rain, "we remember. Not only those we loved, but those we have forgotten. Not only what was given, but what was broken." She turned slowly, facing each of the elders. "Do you witness me?" They answered in unison, "We do." She turned toward the idol and poured a calabash of water over its head. "Do you hear me?" And in that moment, a breeze stirred through the circle, strong and sudden, sending flames flickering sideways. It was answer enough. Then Amarachi stepped forward and opened her palm. In it lay a single kola nut, perfect, unbroken. She held it to the sky. "Let this be the bridge," she said. "Let this be the pact renewed." She placed it before the idol. But before the next chant could begin, a voice broke through the ceremony. "No." The villagers turned. Abika had stepped into the circle. Mud stained his feet. His chest rose and fell with a fury he no longer cared to hide. "This is madness," he spat. Rain came because the clouds filled. Not because of idols and chants. We deceive ourselves with shadows and call it wisdom. Gasps spread through the crowd. To interrupt the ozo of remembrance was to risk being cursed, not just in this life, but in the next. Amarachi turned to face him. The ancestors sent a storm. They unearthed the idol. They spoke in wind and vision. You still deny them? I deny fear disguised as faith, he growled. If the ancestors demand blood, thunder, and groveling, are they not tyrants? I work the land. I feed mouths. I do not bow to stone. Elder Tun stepped forward, eyes narrowed. Abika, you speak with the boldness of a man who has not listened. Leave this place before your words cost more than you can pay. But it was too late. The wind shifted violently. From a breeze to a gale in an instant. The flames in the firewood ring rose high, licking the air like spirits awakening from slumber. The clouds thickened without warning. Thunder cracked overhead. And the idol moved. Not much, just a shudder, a tilt. But everyone saw it. Amarachi's eyes widened. They are angry. Suddenly, Abika cried out and clutched his chest. He staggered backward, then fell to his knees. What is this? The wind roared louder. His eyes rolled back. Foam touched the corners of his mouth. He convulsed once, twice, then went still. The crowd gasped. Amarachi rushed to him, placed her hands on his head, chanting under her breath. The idol pulsed with heat. And then, he breathed. His eyes opened slowly. But they were not his. When he spoke, the voice was not Abika's. You have forgotten the covenant, the voice said, deep, old, shaking the very earth. We gave you rain, and you gave us silence. We gave you fruit, and you burned our groves. We gave you guidance. And you mocked our name. Amarachi bowed her head. What must we do? She asked. The voice from Abika's mouth answered, restore the sacred path. Rebuild the shrine. Sing our names. Feed the earth with gratitude. Remember, or next time, we will not send rain. We will send silence. Then Abika gasped again, and collapsed. Elder Tun stepped forward, took the idol in his arms. And kissed its head. So let it be spoken. So let it be done. And the wind stopped. In the days that followed the ceremony, the village of Okoroba was not the same. Something had shifted, deep beneath the earth, in the air, in the hearts of the people. The silence left by the retreating storm was not empty, but sacred. As though the ancestors themselves still lingered, watching, waiting. The villagers moved about their daily routines with a newfound reverence. Each breath, each step. Each word was weighed with meaning. People lowered their voices when they passed the shrine grove. They greeted the sunrise with whispered prayers and poured libations into the soil before planting even a single seed. Children were no longer told ghost stories at night to frighten them but were gathered under moonlight to listen to the tales of the ancestors, the real ones, full of wisdom, pain, and pride. Abika had not spoken since the possession. He now moved slowly, with the gaze of one who had seen beyond the veil. He had been the village's most vocal skeptic. Now he avoided eye contact and often sat alone near the river, staring into the water for hours. Some said he had been permanently altered. Others whispered that a fragment of the ancestral spirit remained lodged in his soul. Amarachi visited him once. She brought a calabash of palm wine and sat beside him on the flat stone by the riverbank. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Finally, she said, "You were brave to speak the truth as you saw it." He looked at her, his face pale, his eyes dark. "I was blind," he whispered. "And they gave me sight in the most terrible way." "They did not strike you down," she replied. "They spoke through you. That means something." He nodded, then turned back to the river. "The wind is never just wind anymore, is it?" "No," she said. "Not here. Not anymore." And so began the Great Restoration, which had long fallen into decay. Stones were unearthed from the sacred hill, scrubbed, anointed, and returned to their rightful place. Young men carried wood from the deepest parts of the forest, guided by older men who remembered the forgotten paths. Women mixed clay and ash to form sacred paints for markings. And old songs were brought back to life, songs that had not been sung in 2 generations. The idol was placed at the heart of the new shrine. Now housed in a structure woven from sacred irako and palm, ringed by river stones and shaded by an arch of vines. Every morning, Amarachi lit incense and offered prayers, not only for rain, but for memory, so that the lessons of the drought would not fade with the harvest. Offerings resumed. Each week, the villagers brought gifts to the shrine, roasted yams, carved masks, dried fish, calabashes of milk. No one gave out of fear anymore. They gave out of awe. They had seen what forgetting brought. And now, they were learning what remembering could restore. The rain did not return in torrents as before, but in measured rhythm, like a conversation, not a reprimand. The clouds drifted in slowly. The rain fell softly. It kissed the soil rather than drowned it. Crops began to sprout once more, cautiously at first, as if testing the air. The trees grew new leaves. Flowers returned to the riverbanks. Birds nested in the canopy. The land was healing. And so were the people. Amarachi, now seen not as an odd girl but as a sacred bridge, began to train others, 4 young women and 2 men, on the chants, the symbols, the rhythms of the old ways. They formed the beginnings of a new priesthood, not bound by lineage, but by spirit. She taught them how to listen to the wind, how to read dreams, how to speak to fire, and how to stand still until the world spoke first. One night, a strange glow appeared above the ancestral grove, soft, golden, flickering like a flame without heat. Some villagers claimed it was lightning caught in the trees. Others believed it was the ancestors themselves dancing in approval. Amarachi said nothing. She simply sat at the edge of the grove, singing a lullaby her mother had once used to call the spirits during times of peace. But not all was calm. A trader from a nearby town came to Okoroba. Drawn by stories of the storm and the speaking idol, he arrived with questions and a bag of silver coins, asking to purchase the sacred figure. He called it a relic, symbol of cultural value. He promised to house it in a museum, where the world can see its beauty. Amarachi refused. The trader returned a second time, this time with government officials, claiming ownership of the land due to ancient colonial boundary records. He spoke of modernization, of development, of progress. Elder Tund met them at the edge of the village. The officials left, and the idol remained. But this confrontation stirred something deeper. The village understood now that remembering was not enough. It had to be protected. So they made a vow, written not on paper, but on stone, placed at the center of the shrine. We are the voices of those who came before. We are the seeds of those yet to come. We do not forget. Time passed. The rains returned as they once had long ago, regular, kind, life-giving. The river Oran rose to a level not seen in 20 years. Harvests were plentiful. Songs filled the air again. Weddings resumed. New children were born and named after ancestors, not celebrities. At every naming ceremony, a drop of river water was placed on the infant's tongue, so that their first taste of the world would be that of memory. And every year, on the day the storm first came, the village gathered to reenact the Ozo of remembrance. Not in fear, but in celebration. They called it, the day the wind spoke. And each time Amarachi led the ritual, she ended it with the same words. May we never need another storm to remember who we are. Years passed. And the village of Okoroba became a different place, not in the way of tall buildings or paved roads, but in something deeper, something rooted. The change did not shout, it breathed. It hummed softly in the river's song, in the rustling of leaves over the shrine grove, in the rhythm of footsteps across sacred ground. The village had not merely survived the storm. It had been reborn through it. The people did not forget. That was the vow. Each child born after the storm grew up knowing the tale, not as myth, but as memory. They were taught that the wind carried more than air, and that silence could speak louder than words. They were taught to listen, to the land, to the ancestors, to the stillness between raindrops. No child left the village without first kneeling before the shrine to greet the spirits. And no harvest began without the sacred drums marking the bond between the living and the dead. Amarachi aged slowly, as if time itself treated her with reverence. She no longer carried the idol around her neck, it now rested permanently in the center of the shrine. Encased in clear glass framed with carved ebony. She remained the spiritual guide of the village, but more than that, she had become its heart. Her students, now grown, had taken on their own roles as keepers of memory. One had become a dream interpreter. Another tended to the shrine grove. One had left for the distant city but returned every year to offer kola and song to the ancestors. They called themselves the listeners. And their presence ensured that what had once been lost would never be forgotten again. But time, like the river, always moves. One season, a sickness came. Not a spiritual one, but a human one. A fever from the coastal roads, brought by passing traders and travelers, crept into the village. It struck silently and swiftly. Children coughed. Elders grew weak. The people gathered at the shrine to pray, but this time the sky remained clear. No wind rose. No voices stirred. And fear began to grow again like an old weed returning to fertile soil. Amarachi, now gray-haired but still upright, remained calm. She told the villagers, "Not all storms roar. Some come to test our roots." She stood alone beneath the Irako tree and lifted her face to the sky. "If this is our test, then we will carry it with dignity," she whispered. "If the ancestors speak not in wind." She only opened her arms and drew Amarachi into an embrace. When Amarachi awoke, she wept, not out of sorrow, but peace. The sickness passed. Not immediately, and not without pain. Some were lost. Graves were dug, names were sung into the earth, tears were poured with libations. But the village did not forget. They did not panic. They remembered who they were. They remembered the wind. On the first anniversary of the storm after the fever, the entire village gathered again. The day the wind spoke had become not just a ritual, but a sacred festival. Dancers moved in circles through the shrine grove. Drummers pounded rhythms taught by ancestors in dreams. Children wore masks carved to resemble both human and spirit. And Amarachi, now older, now slower, stood once more before the idol. She lifted her voice to the sky. "We remember." The wind stirred. And the people, all of them, from the eldest to the youngest, answered as one. "We remember." That night, as the fires burned low and the village fell into slumber, Amarachi sat by the river Oran. The water shimmered in the moonlight. And frogs sang lullabies from hidden reeds. She breathed deeply, letting the peace of the land fill her lungs. She felt them, just as she had all those years ago. Not as voices now. Not as thunder or rain, but as a whisper behind the veil. A gentle presence brushing the edge of thought. The ancestors were not angry. They were not calling for more. They were content. She smiled. Not because the journey was easy, but because it had been worthwhile. She placed a final kola nut into the river, watched it drift, and whispered to no one in particular. "You've taught us well." The breeze picked up slightly, curling through the grass and into the shrine grove, carrying her words into the branches of the Irako tree, where they settled like a blessing. In the years that followed, Amarachi passed into the realm of the ancestors. There was no storm. No thunder. Just a soft wind that blew through the village for 3 days straight, steady, warm, constant. The people knew. They wept, they sang, they celebrated. Her grave lay beneath the Irako tree. Marked not by stone, but by a wooden staff embedded upright in the soil, wrapped in cowries and red cloth. And around it grew a circle of wildflowers, none of which had ever grown in that spot before. Visitors came from other villages, even from far-off cities, to hear the story. And the villagers told it again and again. Not just the facts, but the feeling. They described the storm. The wind. The idol. The voices. And Amarachi, the girl who had once been mocked, who became the mouth of memory. They taught the children that when the wind rises suddenly, when the leaves dance though the air is still, when dreams carry unfamiliar names, that is not fear. That is remembering. And so Okaroba endured, not because of stone walls or strong arms, but because of a whisper that remained. A whisper carried in the wind.